are back with the Fantasy Alarm NBA DFS live stream for today's 11-game slate. I'm your host tonight, James Grande, and the Fantasy Alarm this stream we have DFS live stream, local DFS pro John Impemba. John, it is so good to be back with you, brother. What's going on?
Hey, it's great when the NBA season kicks off. So we had the 2-game slate last night, which we killed. Playbook, lineups, everything. We just absolutely crushed. We did the podcast for today's 11-game slate. I've done the playbook. You did the Value Vault article, which we've had. We have the starting 5 video out. The Ultimate Lineups just dropped right now as well. And now we're in this live stream. Just because it's the NBA season, right before we go on the live stream, what happens? Jimmy Butler gets ruled out, throws a wrench into literally everything. Scrambles are happening. Who's starting now for Miami? What's the value that's going to open up for that? Insanity, to kick off the NBA live stream. I really wouldn't have it any other way. I'm super excited just to jump into this and get this slate going.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because you think that game number 1 for most teams is going to be cool, calm. We already know the injury news. We already know projected starting lineups, and then this happens. The Butler news happens. Let's just, besides Jimmy Butler news, which is obviously the key injury piece of the slate now, let's just break down a couple others that we have. There's not a lot. Mitchell Robinson was ruled out earlier today. Blake Griffin, as we know, will miss some time. He is out. Markieff Morris starting in his place. Taj Gibson on the Knicks is playing. And Deion Waiters is probably currently protesting outside of the Heat arena because he is suspended for tonight.
I probably wish they didn't suspend him if they knew Butler was going to play, right?
I personally don't think they care very much because there is a very famous Enrique Iglesias song that we will get to that they have in their back pocket. But let's go over to some Vegas totals, John. We won't break them all down because it's 11 games. We do have some big totals, though. Most notably, Phoenix, Sacramento. I mean, that's going to be the go-to game. It's a late-night hammer, 10 o'clock. We love the exposure. We love climbing the leaderboards. 232.5 and only a 1.5 point spread. So I think that's going to be a very popular game. We have Minnesota, Brooklyn at a 229. That's actually up 3.5 points from when it opened. So that is an interesting rise from when it opened to now. And there aren't many other very high-scoring games. I mean, Washington, Dallas is 220. Oklahoma City, Utah is 221.5. But, throughout the day we've been talking, and me and you haven't really talked even about a lot of Utah, Oklahoma City Thunder guys in the 221 total. And that just kind of speaks to, I think we both are on the same level of thinking where 221 is very high for that game. So, I mean, those are just some totals to mention. Let's just jump right into it, John, shall we? And we'll start off at the point guard position as we always do. And we'll hop right into your playbook as our guide. You guys can obviously look along with us or just listen along. Your first name on the point guard list is Luka Doncic. I think Luka Doncic is a stud. We touted him all last year. Is that your top point guard of the slate? And if not, I mean, I see some other really, really interesting names here. Why don't you just start breaking down the point guard position for us?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we're talking about potential for the most overall points of the point guard position, I think that Doncic definitely has that ability and upside, as we saw last year. Threatens triple doubles. He can score in the high 20s when he needs to. He's facing the Wizards, who are trotting out Ish Smith out there as their starting point guard. There's no real matchup for him there. I'm not too worried really about the price tag as much on Doncic tonight. And I think if you want to put him in your lineup, I think there's potential for him to be pretty low owned because, as you mentioned, there is that late night hammer that we're all trying to get a piece of. And of course, De'Aaron Fox is in that game, and he has just a great matchup himself. So I think you're going to take a look at the top price guys at point guard tonight with Doncic, Lillard, Irving, guys like that. And they're probably not going to have the ownership that maybe they typically have because, I think it's fair to say that Fox maybe is a little bit undervalued, maybe a little bit mispriced tonight to kick off the year. in the matchup here that he has against the Suns, who, going to be a fast-paced game. It's going to be the highest-scoring game. And as I mentioned, it's not even just a point spread of 232, I think I started at. It was also a 1-point spread. So they're expecting this game to be close, competitive. Maybe we get another overtime game like we had last night, opening night, between the Raptors and Pelicans, and that just skyrockets teams up the board. So I do love Luka a lot. I think he makes a great pivot option if you're building 10, 20 lineups tonight. But I think the chalk play is definitely going to be De'Aaron Fox here in this matchup against Phoenix.
I mean, speaking of Phoenix, on the flip side of that game, we have another point guard who might garner even higher ownership than De'Aaron Fox and Ricky Rubio. And I think he correlates very well with Devin Booker. I think this is an opportunity for Rubio to contend for the league in assists. I don't think that's a stretch considering he has very good offensive weapons in Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton. You have him in your playbook. Do you prefer Rubio in the mid-tier? Is that your favorite mid-tier play? I know I see guys like Jeff Teague. I see guys like Malcolm Brogdon, Jamal Murray. Why don't you break down the mid-tier and maybe who's your cash plays and who's your GPP plays amongst that group?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely consider Rubio probably a little bit of a mix of both. I mean, I think ownership from a standpoint, you can put him in cash games.
Right.
So you think that he's going to be pretty highly owned because he is that nice price tag. And again, we're talking about the highest, scoring game of the slate by, 10 or 12 points here. But I like him more towards the GBP aspect of these contests today. I've been someone that's been talking a ton about Malcolm Brogdon pretty much since he left and signed with the Pacers. We loved him with the Bucks. He was always sort of my Mr. Cash Game play, even when he was coming off the bench. And now he's going to be the starter. There's no Oladipo there. They don't really have like a go-to scorer. Like, yeah, they have Lamb and they have T.J. Warren and whatnot. But I think Brogdon is still going to be one of the more offensive forward point guards in the league this year. And he's a bigger guard as well. He can get you some rebounds. He'll get the assists and steals. So mid-tier cash game play, I really like Malcolm Brogdon tonight. You mentioned Jeff Teague. I do like Teague in this spot here against Kyrie Irving. Again, Irving not known for his defense. Now he's the show again in Brooklyn, where I think you're going to see him perform more like he did with Cleveland back in the days, where it's all offense and the defense is kind of going by the wayside. So I think Teague here, a good spot at cheap price tag. And then GBPs, we talked about it on the podcast. Jamal Murray's right there. Played really well against Portland last year. Has the scoring upside where I put in the playbook, he can give you 50 or he can give you 20. It's one or the other. But I'm liking him a lot tonight. Price is a little bit too expensive, I want to say, over on FanDuel at 71. More comfortable paying the 63 over on DraftKings. Right.
I agree. And isn't it funny, John? I mean, you look, I don't want to give away like a teaser to Malcolm Brogdon's ownership, but we love this sub 10% ownership for Malcolm Brogdon, even in cash games. I mean, it's such a leverage play for us because he's going to get us there to 5X every night. I mean, it's just what Malcolm Brogdon's MO has been because he's good offensively and he's very good defensively. He's a very sound player. I love the sub 10% ownership.
And he's going up against Reggie Jackson, and we saw
Derrick Rose too. Derrick Rose too.
There's no real defense coming at him tonight either. So he can hit the outside shot. He's an efficient shooter. He just fills all the check boxes for me here with Malcolm Brogdon.
Agreed. Couldn't agree more. Let's move over to shooting guard, which we kind of talked about on the podcast last night, and I didn't really stray away from my thinking throughout the day that the top of the shooting guard position is kind of loaded. I mean, you can play Luka over there on DK. Bradley Beal is a shooting guard. We have Devin Booker in the game that we've talked about that we want to tout pretty much probably more than any other game on this 11-game slate. DeMar DeRozan is probably cheaper than he should be. Zach LaVine made Fensty's starting 5 video in a pretty good matchup against the Charlotte team. I think that game could be sneaky in terms of scoring because I don't think there's a lot of defense on either side. And then Buddy Hield and Bogdan in that game. I mean, there's a ton of shooting guard options. Where would you go? Who's your favorite spend up? Who's your favorite mid-tier guy?
Yeah, we had a little bit of playbook inception today. If you're reading it with Buddy Hield, Brogdon, obviously mentioned in that as well as sort of the value pivot off of him. He's just going to save about $2,000 almost, jumping down from Hield to Bogdan there. So I definitely like them both again. And those players are going to be popular tonight because it's just the way these slates go. You're getting that late night hammer with the high point total. So ownerships are always going to be increased. I kind of liken it to, Coors Field games in MLB, where ownership projections are going to always be higher on those guys because the potential for the points are going to be there across the board. So for sure, Buddy Hield's someone you're going to take a look at. I agree. I don't think we're going to see DeRozan much cheaper than this, and that's where I have a hard time as someone who typically maybe makes 2 or 3 lineups. I don't vary it up. I'm not a mass multi-entry player because you can't get all the exposure you want across the board. And that's what's a little bit frustrating, but, you kind of work within your limits, and you have to understand those. I would love to play DeRozan. I don't think they have anybody that can guard him. 10-point spread there, maybe a little bit worrisome. You're going to look at it from that aspect. Could be a blowout. Could be, maybe he gets limited on night 1 to 30 minutes. He doesn't totally exceed the expectations, but at his price tag, you need like 36 fantasy points. Certainly doable. Booker at the top, I think, is going to be probably the highest owned shooting guard for someone who's paying up. I think Beal's a good pivot off of him, and I think you're just going to go that way on Booker because, again, as we talked about already, it's that matchup. If you want to go into that mid-tier point, as I have in the playbook, there's a lot of interesting options I think you can go with. I talk about Jeremy Lamb and how he's moving now again, another new addition to the Pacers. When he would play with the Hornets, largely better off the bench, but he's going to start here. He's a guy that could get you rebounds. He can score the basketball. He can hit the outside shot. And those are all valuable now, especially being part of, the starting lineup there. So I like Jeremy Lamb. I'm obviously a big Celtics fan, and so Jaylen Brown, shooting guard tonight eligible, Marcus Smart, guys like that. Even I think I saw Hayward could possibly, he's either small forward or shooting guard eligible as well. I think those guys are all in line for potential bounce backs this year. After the disappointing year last year, Brown played better towards the end of last year. He got his money a couple of days ago. He got that big contract. So Jaylen Brown, only $5,000 on DraftKings tonight, I think is a really good buy there at the shooting guard position. And then we have to talk about Tyler Hero. With the news breaking that Jimmy Butler's not going to play now, he was already slated to go into the starting lineup, but you worried a little bit about that usage rate. But the kid was shooting all preseason, making a ton of shots, led the team in scoring during the preseason. It hurts a little bit because the Celtics were supposed to draft him, and then Miami took him the pick before.
The sniper.
Before we jumped on, though, you had another name, value name to bring up on Miami. Why don't you bring him up and let everybody in on the little secret?
I think it's just worth mentioning all of these guys because we don't know what to expect. We saw in the last preseason game, we saw Kendrick Nunn go for 40. And there's already been reports prior to the Jimmy Butler news that Kendrick Nunn was going to compete with the likes of Deion Waiters and with the likes of Tyler Hero. There's no Deion Waiters, and now he's not competing with Hero because there's no Jimmy Butler. So I just think there's minutes to be had. Obviously, there's a ton of production. This is a guy in Butler who on this Heat roster could realistically go, peak Bulls 22-5-5 potentially. So I think Kendrick Nunn is like a really deep dive tournament. I think something that we were joking to before this live stream, I wish FanDuel had its drop back. This would be the perfect play. Kendrick Nunn would be the perfect drop score on FanDuel for tonight. But I also think it's just interesting just to pedal back to point guard. Do you have any potential interest in the likes of Goran Dragic? We haven't officially gotten a lineup for the Heat yet, so we don't know who's going to be starting in replace of Jimmy Butler. But we got to suspect he's going to be the primary scorer when he's on the floor, right?
I do. I think Dragic is definitely going to be someone that we're going to have to now reconsider. I did have him in one of the example lineups I already released out there on the Fantasy Alarm in the cash game lineup. I thought the price point was good. I was okay with him potentially even coming off the bench because I still felt like the minutes would be there, and maybe even if he's coming off the bench and Butler and them aren't playing together, that's beneficial towards him as well. Now no Butler, maybe he even bumps into the starting lineup. So, yeah, I think Dragic is pretty good for cash games here. Obviously, Memphis has typically played slower, and Miami has typically played slower, so you worry a little bit about pace here. But I mean, now you're going Dragic against a rookie point guard in John Morant. Maybe there's a matchup for him to exploit. And we saw Dragic last year when healthy and sort of given the minutes, he kind of went off at times and had some pretty big games. So for sure, I do think that Dragic is now someone that's worth reconsidering in lineups if you probably hadn't considered them previously. So I mean, you have that, and I have one other shooting guard. I think that I've talked about a little bit on the podcast, and it's Dennis Schroeder. The fact that there's no Paul George and Russell Westbrook anymore, like that's just a ton of usage that has to go somewhere. Chris Paul has never been like the go-to usage person, but Schroeder certainly is. Schroeder's never seen a shot he doesn't like. Even if he comes off the bench, I think that could help him even more. $4,100 over on DraftKings tonight. GBPs, I'm big on Schroeder here. Even though it is up against Utah, and in Utah, not exactly a spot we love attacking all the time. Low percentage here. I think there's an opportunity for shots to go his way.
I can get behind it. Let's move over to the worst position on the board. I think that's a pretty clear cut.
It's ugly on FanDuel. It's ugly on FanDuel because at least on DraftKings, there's like 30 people that have like small forward eligibility.
Right.
Yeah, on FanDuel it's like 5, and you're really stuck where you're going.
Now, John, I see Gordon Hayward in the playbook, but to my knowledge, they're not playing the Timberwolves tonight. So are we sure we're on Gordon Hayward? Because if we're playing the Timberwolves, I think Gordon Hayward should be a $10K price tag.
Well, last year he was. Last year, whenever Gordon Hayward played the Timberwolves, he went for like 50 fantasy points. I'm just going to keep on preaching the fact that there's no Kyrie Irving anymore. I'm going to believe in that there's better team chemistry here. He looked good during the preseason. From all you hear, there was no hesitation. He looked far better than he did last year when he was, a year removed from that gruesome injury. And there was obviously some internal turmoil going on there within the team. Everything seems to be good spirits. So I'm interested to see him sort of break out here. I've seen 2 different lineups when I've done some research that actually have Hayward starting at power forward instead of Tatum starting at power forward. Al Horford, I don't think is really going to be able to. I don't think the quickness-wise he'd be able to really stay with either of those two. So if that's the case, I'm perfectly okay with it. Tobias Harris, not really a great defender, so I'm still not worried about Hayward or Tatum if they're up in that matchup. But I do like Hayward. I think at his price tag, $6,000, 5x 30 points shouldn't be too difficult to get for him.
I think some other small forwards that we would agree with. I think both of us are strongly on Kelly Oubre in probably all formats, and that's not something we've been comfortable with saying in the past. But I mean, it's just the proof is in the pudding. Last year with Phoenix, he just is a very productive player. He's going to play a lot of minutes. I think the Mikal Bridges experiment is over, considering he plays 40 minutes and stands in the corner for all 40 of them. Danilo Gallinari.
He's not as bad as Andre Roberson, but he's close.
They are at least Andre Roberson is a lockdown defender. Like he has that in his pocket. Like Mikal Bridges turns the ball over 3 times and gets stealed, so he gets you back to 0 fantasy points. Like Roberson doesn't touch the ball, so he'll never turn it over. He'll just accumulate steals. I think that's maybe the one difference. But yeah, they're pretty terrible, the both of them.
Yeah.
Danilo Gallinari is the top-priced small forward tonight, at least on FanDuel. That's the one player I'd probably consider from the Thunder tonight specifically. I don't love going up against Utah, but I do agree with your sentiments. Someone's going to score the basketball. It's likely going to be Gallinari. Talk about our boy, John, because he's our boy. I'm trademarking it as our boy, John Isaac. Most improved player in the NBA this year.
Yeah, I called you and I stands in the playbook. I mean, it's the truth. I mean, we just like what his physical abilities are.
Right.
It hasn't really translated consistently enough yet on the court. But I mean, he's essentially a 7-foot small forward that has some range, that can block shots, get rebounds. He just needs the opportunity, which they're starting him. This is a good matchup against Cleveland. They're not expected to win any games really this year. So soft spot for him here tonight. So I do like him. Obviously, you and I rode him when he was much cheaper last year. He was in that $5K range, or even maybe a little less, and we got him all the way up to when he was around $6,000. Well, they're sort of onto what his potential could be this year, and they're starting him off at 6K. So you're not getting exactly like a ton of value here. I think, he maybe even will give us, 28 to 32 fantasy points tonight. So he's not going to kill value, but I mean, this is a guy that I put on the play, but I pretty much tell you to pay attention to, because I just love the potential that he brings. Again, there could be some good upside tonight as well. Low ownership play.
Speaking of value, I'll bring two guys up because one is in the playbook, one's in the starting five video. One's Torian Prince, one's Will Barton. If you had to kind of decipher, pick one, would you lean Barton's way? Would you lean Prince's way? I mean, one's probably in a better game environment in Brooklyn, but we know from numerous times last year, and it's not going to get any better with Kent Bazemore and guys like that at small forward for Portland. We loved attacking the Portland small forward position. So, would you lean either one of them in the value tier at small forward?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think you can go one way or the other. If you're going cash games, I think Prince maybe makes a little bit more sense. If you're going GPPs, of course, Barton is your go-to GPP guy. On that team, I do wish we would know if he's starting or not. I read a lot that maybe Craig is going to start at small forward. I put the playbook. I actually like it if Barton comes off the bench because then that some of that offense could just naturally flow through him, depending on how their sub breakdown goes. So in GVPs again, he's a dart throw. He's not someone I'm making in my main lineup. But yeah, I'm always in on Will the Thrill, and you get that mini revenge narrative game there once being a member of the Blazers.
I mean, Will the Thrill was always at his best 2 years ago when he was coming off the bench. It was never as a starter. So I couldn't agree more. Let's move on to power forward. I think the next two positions are really stacked. I think power forward is really stacked, and I think center is going to win us or lose us a slate because the options we have. Yeah, if we pick the wrong guy, I mean, obviously there's no wrong answer. We'll get there. But let's start at the top, power forward. We have a lot of good options. We have LaMarcus Aldridge, who is completely underpriced on DraftKings at 7,300 against the Mitchell Robinson-less Knicks. We have Marvin Bagley, who you and me are very fond of in that 232 total, and he's starting. And we don't have to worry about Nemanja Bjelica anymore. I mean, he's on the bench, but he's on the bench. Keywords. We have Kristaps Porzingis, who we both were talking about on the pod last night, severely underpriced on FanDuel against a Washington front court that was second to last in rebounding percentage last year. And it's just very exploitable. Thomas Bryant, a good rebounder, not a great defender if that matchup, crosses path. And Rui Hachimura is a rookie. So I think that's a very exploitable matchup. Where are you going at the top? It's very hard to decipher and just because we want to like all of them. We want to play all of them.
I do. I mean, I love, obviously, the Aldridge play here, especially as you mentioned, there's some Twitter birds flying around that maybe, Bobby Portis could be starting at center tonight. And, I mean, that's just going to be like an Olay defense played against Aldridge tonight if that's the case. And he's going to crush. I mean, we have him highly projected in terms of fantasy points as well over Fantasy Line. I think I saw him projected for 40 fantasy points. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely within range in this matchup. Again, the 10-point spread may be a little bit worrisome, and you just never know what Pop's going to do, right? There's just always the chance that he plays 26 minutes and, you're just left, scratching your head why that ended up happening. But, obviously I like Aldridge. You talked about Bagley. I mean, another guy that you and I just, crushed on last year, just wishing he would play minutes. Anytime he played minutes, he killed it. He averaged 24-9 last year against Phoenix, who routinely one of the worst teams against opposing front courts all season long. So, they didn't really get any better there. Bagley, more better value, obviously, on DraftKings at 72, 8K on FanDuel, maybe a little bit tighter budget for you to figure out there. Zinger, I mean, I even think 8,200 on DraftKings is a little too cheap. I mean, this is a 9K plus player when he's, in his peak form. So you're getting a good matchup here against Washington. Yep, sign me up. Someone where I wish I had the money to make 100 lineups because I would like to use combinations of a lot of these power forwards.
And that's just at the top. And we have a lot of value. I think your Jason Tatum call is completely fine in the mid tier. But there's a lot of really interesting mid to lower tier plays, like when we go below Tatum. I mean, Rob Covington at 5.4K over on DraftKings is a steal. Do we think he's going to grab 19 rebounds like he did? No, but he's playing power forward, which is super interesting. Right. He might, because he is playing power forward. That's interesting. We have both the Morrises starting in very interesting roles. I mean, Markieff in Detroit has literally nobody. Detroit is running out a very bad lineup and a very bad roster right now without Blake Griffin, and he's very cheap across the industry. Marcus, I mean, we've seen him score in double figures for 4 straight seasons. That's another really good value play.
You think Markieff could find himself as one of the highest owned players on the slate?
I do. I think Markieff ends up being one of the chalkiest plays. I mean, we're getting a guy who's sub 4K starting, and yes, it's a tough matchup, but I think everyone's kind of thinking the same that we are in terms of Detroit's roster. Yes, they kept Christian Wood, who we mentioned on the podcast, you mentioned in the playbook. Christian Wood is a fantasy point per minute monster, but he doesn't play a ton of minutes, and without Blake, who, kind of played that backup center role, like last year they would sub Blake out early, play Drummond the whole first quarter, and then bring Blake in as the backup center, or Zaza Pachulia as the backup center last year. I think Christian Wood fills that role. So there's just a lot of power forward minutes to be had for Markieff tonight. I think we could probably safely project him at 26, 27 minutes. And if we give him 26 minutes at 3.7K or whatever he is on FanDuel, sub 4K on DraftKings rather, sorry.
Yeah.
It's very hard to pass up when there aren't a lot of injuries, there aren't a lot of value openings other than like the Heat and the Knicks. But even Bobby Portis, another value, 5.5K, that's not a value, the more. So I think Markieff ends up being one of the more popular plays.
Yeah, I want to argue with you, and I do like Rob Covington a lot tonight. Again, like someone who doesn't need to score all the time to really go ahead and just crush value because he gives you blocks, steals, rebounds. So I like him more, obviously, over on FanDuel. I wish he was a small forward on FanDuel. He's not, obviously, because he's the power forward, so you have to deal with that deep power forward position and pick and choose. Are you going to sit Porzingis or Aldridge or Bagley just to start Rob Covington? If you can find the salary relief, I guess you can make that move. But tough sitting for him over on FanDuel, but he has just as likely, he has that ceiling to match what they can do. So that's always the risk there. And then you want to talk about center. You mentioned it. Could be the break or make, position of the night. You have over on DraftKings, you have Joel Embiid, just far too cheap, under $10,000. Going against the Celtics, who maybe are starting Daniel Tice, could be starting Robert Williams, who's not carrying an injury designation. It's not going to be Enes Kanter, but Kanter's going to play 20 to 25 minutes probably. So all spots where Embiid should just absolutely dominate. I put in the playbook that he could have a double-double by half. Honestly, could. We talked about it on the podcast. Justin Fencer talked about it in the starting 5 video. The Celtics Embiid stopper plays for the 76ers now. And he's in the power forward spot for them in Al Horford. So, yes, it'll be the best defender against Joel Embiid tonight could honestly be Marcus Smart. So it'll be interesting to see exactly what happens there. How do you take all that information and then now start your lineups with Joel Embiid and then try to wrap around this Phoenix Kings game around him?
It's frustrating because but you talk about how do we not do that, John? How do we not start our lineups with Joel Embiid? But if you look at DraftKings, we have Andre Drummond, who we've mentioned. Mm-hmm. The Pistons have nobody, who's 8-4, and this is something that we've been talking about off air for a little while now. He's 8.4K. Yes, it's
21 and 16 against them last year,
and that is a very tough matchup. And now it's a guy 1.5 fantasy points per minute without Blake Griffin on the floor last year. Yeah. I mean, and we haven't even mentioned Karl Anthony Towns, who's projected the highest ownership on the slate.
Yep. Could you even say that the Pacers not having Thad anymore, but having more of a stretch forward and T.J. Warren helping out Drummond? Down low on the rebounds and the glass, one less person to really compete with, possibly, going up against Turner or Sabonis down the block, because Warren's not really a guy that's known for sticking his nose in those areas.
So they're starting Sabonis at power forward.
Okay, I like that even better.
So,
so you're having Sabonis and Turner together? How's that working for him?
It will be interesting. Warren's starting at the 3, Lamb at the 2, and then our boy Malcolm starting at point guard. So, I mean, the thing is, Andre Drummond has come out and said he wants to play 40 minutes a game, and that's what he's ready for. So
he's shooting threes now too. Not well, but
oh God, I hope not. They're scoring 50 points tonight. Maybe we just play Towns and Embiid. I think there is something to be said though. If you can do it now that there's Heat value and there's Knicks and Pistons value, I think on DraftKings playing 2 centers could be a really strong approach. Like because Drummond is cheap enough to get 2. Like if you want to play Towns Drummond or Embiid Drummond, I think that is a really strong approach. How about the rest of the position, John? Run through it quickly. I see Whiteside in the playbook. I see Bobby Portis, who previously mentioned. And I really think this last center you have in the playbook could be really sneaky and just completely forgotten about in a game that we have touted this whole live stream.
Yeah. So obviously you mentioned, Whiteside. I just like the GPP upside. Tough matchup, I know, against Jokic, but the blocks and rebounds are always going to be there. I mentioned maybe he's even going to play a little bit more minutes than he did in Miami because Spoelstra just hated him in Miami. So maybe there's some potential for that. Portis, always a great point per minute player if he's starting, sure. But that brings us to Dwayne Dedmon, the starting center now in Sacramento. And a guy that can rebound, defend, can score a little bit as we saw in Atlanta. And we attacked, we had 2 rules last year. One, attack the Brooklyn Nets at center. If they're not there, you go and attack the Phoenix Suns at center. So, again, things haven't changed there for Phoenix. Maybe Ayton's gotten better. We'll have to wait and see. Last year he wasn't a great defender. So Dedmon could be a sneaky play, only $5,100 and $5,300. Everybody's looking to spend up at that spot, pivoting to spend down to Dedmon and get yourself that stack of that Kings and Suns game could be the way to go.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're onto something here with Dedmon because I don't think Ayton's going to be an improved defender. He's just not very flight of foot. He's very crafty with his feet offensively, but he's just not like a mobile defender. So I do think Dwayne Dedmon can stretch the floor too. I think that's something to consider. It also opens up the lane for our boy Marvin Bagley a little bit more too, John. Let's get some final thoughts. If you had one player, John, we're going to take one player that is going to hit 10x value tonight. Everyone is watching. The pressure's on. The lights are on. Who is your guy to hit 10 or exceed 10x value?
10x value. See, I don't think it's too much of a cop-out here to go with Tyler Hero on FanDuel, where he's $3,600, because that means he only needs 36 fantasy points to get you there and get you that 10x. So I'm going to definitely go with Hero. 4,800 on DraftKings, a little bit tougher maybe for him to get 48 points. But you can obviously go Markieff, I think, is in a good spot there. Also very cheap. What is he now? 36, I think you said he was. 3,600 there. So DraftKings, my 10x play. We'll go ahead with Markieff. FanDuel, we'll go with Hero.
I'm going to throw a sneaky 10x play out there on FanDuel as well. I'm going to go out on a limb and say Dwayne Bacon against my Bulls tonight, 10x.
Okay, I like that.
That will do it for today's live stream, John. It was great to be back. We actually kept it on time. And for the new listeners, my dogs didn't bark. And that is going to happen probably 1 out of every 10 live streams.
They'll open the door themselves at one point.
They can open the door. Thankfully, we're moving into a new house. Hopefully there is dog-proof door handles there. Yeah. Thank you so much to our producer, Matt Sells. Behind the scenes, does a great job over here at Fantasy Alarm. For John, I am James. We are in subscriber chat for the next 20 minutes. Peace!